Hello, everyone. Michael Jordan fans are the best. And today we're supposed to be doing a 2000s versus 80s debate. However, Lamont from FYF Sports has not shown up and is not responding to coming to this debate. And for it being the second time, given the first time of him being excused for what he said was a legitimate reason with his sister having a baby, this time, NMB Sports gets the forfeit and wins, and we'll be moving on to the next round. But before we get into that, how are you today, sir? I know you said you wanted to rant a little bit about what you were going to talk about, being loaded up to do so. But how are you, and what do you have to say about the situation and why the 80s are greater than the 2000s?
Yeah, good to be here as always. Not how we wanted to win, right? We put a lot of time into our game plan, and we of course wanted to execute that on the field and show the fans that we're working hard for them. But I don't have anything to comment on Lamont or anything. I don't really care. But I did want to, I put out, like I said, I put all this time into it, so I kind of wanted to just make my arguments, right? I feel like the fans should get something for having to wait and show up twice, right? So essentially, right, I was going to argue the 80s, and we kind of talked about this shortly. I'm just going to rant here for like 10 or 15 minutes. And after the last show, I kind of went over how I think from the all-time player debate, you kind of largely view it from the point of view as a player, like what players do you like or think are great, because you think about what it would be like to have a sky hook like Kareem, or to have a shot like Ray Allen and stuff like that. Vince Carter's leaping ability, right? You kind of think of those things as like from a player to player relation. I think the all-time teams debate is kind of largely from a coach and front office point of view, right? How would you do the matchups? How would you run the best sets or whatever, right, to win a game or have the best team ever? And then I think largely the eras debate, in my opinion, right? This is my opinion. I think I see it largely from a fan's perspective, right? If I could get in a time machine and live in an era when my basketball interest was at its peak, which for most of us is like high school, college. And yes, we're still fans now as we get older, but when we had nothing to do but, hang out with friends, and we had a lot more free time, and not, our priorities were not as serious, right? A lot of us, really delved into the game and watched a lot of hours of sports and things like that. And we followed all the news and stuff, right? So I largely think of the eras debate as like, which one would I want to watch? And I picked the 90s because I thought the salary cap gave us the best litmus test of who was the best player and team, right? I thought with the way the hard salary cap had come into its own in the 90s, we were essentially seeing as good of a product in terms of a level playing field of the competition that we were seeing. And as a fan, you want to see that. After that, I largely put the 80s as the must-see TV, right? With Magic and Bird and things of that nature, right? And out of the top 20 NBA Finals ratings ever, they all come from the 90s and the 80s, -3, I think. And I think 2001 came in at number 20, right? So for the 2000s, they show up at number 20 for the first time ever. But essentially, that's what my main argument was going to be. And like the 80s evolved a lot. You have a lot, the 3-point line coming into its own, even though I know it was in 79, I think it officially came in. So you have the 3-point line. They do a lot of things to the shot clock and the backcourt violation. They speed up the game a little bit, right? And it's all for the fans to make a more enjoyable product. And again, I think a lot of people, I think if I had to get into my opponent's head, I think what he was going to say is probably that the 2000s was deeper, or it was he might argue it was a more even playing field as well. But remember, in the 80s and the 80s to 2000s, you essentially just have a switch of the top heaviness, right? It was largely the East was the murderer's row back in the 80s. And then essentially you had the West being the murderer's row in the 2000s, and the East and the West switched. in terms of how each one was good, and then how each one really wasn't that deep. And it was literally called the Eastern Conference, right, in the 2000s. So I think the same top heaviness is the same. And I just think overall, right, the must-see TV of Magic and Bird, it's still the highest rated college final ever, right? The year before, like, just to kind of reiterate how popular the 80s was and the resurgence of the media. And you also have things like All-Star Game and players finally getting marketed, which maybe that's gone a little too far these days, but you finally have the NBA marketing its players, its superstars, its teams, the All-Star Game, right? I just think the 80s would have been such a fun time to watch the game grow. The rivalry of the Lakers and Celtics was, I think, still probably the greatest thing the NBA's ever seen from just a viewership and storyline standpoint. And so that's largely why I put the 80s over the 2000s, right? And the last thing I wanted to say, and then you can respond or we can do whatever. I was wanting to ask my opponent this. So this is kind of off topic, but also on topic. He had said that all championships are the same. And Dart, I know you agree with that largely as well, which is fine, right? It's just people's opinions. But my question then is this, because probably what my opponent would have done is said, well, today is more skilled and the players are different and the level of competition is different, or the superstars were better, or any kind of variable we could point to where he would say the 2000s were better, right?
Mhm.
My opinion, the logic cannot be the same that all championships are largely the same, but yet we can tell all these differences between, in this specific debate, the eras, right? If you're going to
Mhm.
point out all these differences, it kind of doesn't make sense to me then that all the championships are the same, because the logic would have to follow that if you think all championships are the same, well, then really all the eras are kind of the same and all the players are kind of the same in some kind of fashion, right? That logic would have to follow, because if you're going to tell me, well, the 2000s were so much better or are better than the 80s, then wouldn't it kind of follow that winning a championship in the 2000s would mean more than the 80s? So that was going to be like my last kind of grenade that I was going to try to throw to him and maybe throw him off a little bit. And he can respond to that if he wants or what have you. But that was largely going to be what I had to say. That I'll kind of leave it there.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, I think you could get where I'm coming from with the guys that I have in my top 10. So I've got guys like George Mikan and Bob Cousy. So to that regard, I agree with what you're saying. I do think that all championships are the same. And I also think that the players, you can't separate them by the skill because they all played in their time and space. You can't say that you're just playing make believe when you say that George Mikan wouldn't have beaten Shaquille O'Neal or something. It's not to say that that wouldn't happen. It's just to say that you don't know. So you have to in my opinion, the most logical way to approach all of this is to see how they did in their time and space. Because and you've heard me use this analogy before. You can't take a Spartan and have him fight a Navy SEAL and say, "Oh well, the Spartan is just gonna lose because he doesn't know how to gunfight." So that means that the Navy SEAL is, excuse me, a better fighter or a greater fighter. So it's not that there's no truth in it, but it doesn't make sense. You're just playing make believe at that point. What happened is that the Spartans were at the time the highest tier of warrior, and now the Navy SEALs, or however you want to, generally speaking, that's how you would say it. So to me, yeah, that's how I look at it too. I think that the skills argument is only relative to the time that you're playing in, because there's rule styles, there's play styles, there's a bunch of things that happen over time that it doesn't make sense to account for if you play time machine basketball. It just doesn't make any sense. So
Maybe this doesn't apply to you as much because we agree on that with the skills part. Like, I don't think you could say, like Bob Cousy couldn't get a crossover, right, or something like that. I agree with that.
Mhm.
But I think my opponent, and I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but I think he is in the camp that says players today are largely more skilled, or that the level of competition top to bottom is better, etc. Right? So I think he's in that camp. So maybe it would more specifically, he would need to round that square somehow. And I'm not
Mhm.
sure how he would do that, right? Because if you're going to tell me today's game is so much better, right, in your opinion, well, then winning today must be harder, right? Winning today must mean more than back in the day. I would think, right? That would be my argument to him.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, I don't know exactly what he would say, but to your point, I've heard him say that. So
Yeah.
I would think that yeah, there he might have that level of contradiction in his argument in respect to the championships versus the skill level, but maybe not. I don't know. So he's not here to defend himself. So I don't know. Well, maybe we'll ask him some other time.
Yeah,
But
and also I think the landscape one, I think really is a wash, because you essentially have the Spurs and the Lakers dominating with like 2 or 3 teams, I think, sneak in there and win other rings. The what was it? The Heat in 2006, the Celtics, and the Pistons, right? And then essentially in the 80s, it's just the Celtics and the Lakers dominating. And you have the Pistons at the end win one, and the 76ers won one, right?
mhm.
Oh, that was another thing too. I think seeing the culmination of the ABA in the form of Dr. J and Moses, I think, was probably pretty cool to see, to get the ABA to get some recognition. I know that team wasn't part of the ABA. I just want to make that clear. But in spirit, right, seeing Dr. J and Moses win one was probably pretty cool as well, to be like, they didn't just join, I think, and I think because of Dr. J and Moses winning one, I think it really does. The ABA still lives through that somehow, in my opinion, if that makes sense, right? If they come into into the NBA, even though they were good, don't get me wrong, right? MVPs and stuff like that. Had they not won that ring, I think it really would have been kind of like a maybe a regretful merger, or kind of just didn't go the way you wanted to. But I do think them winning that ring, I think, is important for the ABA's legacy.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I guess it gave more credibility to some of the players.
Yeah.
I think that in the same respect, though, that you had George Gervin come in there and win the 4 scoring titles.
Yep.
You just had the star power. Otherwise, even if Dr. J never won an NBA championship, he was still star power
For sure. Like, it's I think it'd be obvious even to the fans to be like, of course the top talent in the ABA will translate somewhat and be good in the NBA, right? I don't think that's crazy, but I think for those two to win a ring against, the Celtics, and beating that team, and in that time, right? I think that was important, and sort of a looking back kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I to your point, I think it did help the case of that they could compete. Now, obviously, it wasn't just an ABA team,
Yeah.
transposed
I
into
know
the
that would have been
NBA.
really cool, right? If
Mm.
would have been cool if they took the best players in the ABA and just put them on one of the ABA teams and merged that team. That would
Mhm.
have been pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, but yeah, and I mean, we debated eras, and I had the '80s over the '90s. um, I think the '80s, yeah, I think the '80s really was the catalyst for the. Excuse me, I got to sneeze. It's like at the end of my nose.
Oh, yeah, 80s totally like saved the NBA and all of that. Took it to another level.
Yeah, it really just it was really the ignition, I would say, within the rocket to take the NBA worldwide, or to the outside, outside the stratosphere, or however you want to put it. But
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way. Like, the 80s really revived the domestic market,
mm,
and then Jordan took it to the global market. That's not a bad kind of nutshell to put it in.
yeah, yep. So I apologize everybody for this. So FYF has he has to forfeit now because this is the second time that he hasn't showed up for this debate. So
That's
we
all right.
know.
We got another stream at 11, so if we want to do a hard out here, that way we have some time in between, we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Come check out the Sunday show. Nick will be there. We'll have Scap Attack. We'll have AOH. We'll have Robin Sports and Fitness Rants. We should have Hoop God, Steam Engine, Nick, and myself there. And then you're going to be able to call in if you'd like any topic. And you'll have 20 minutes with whoever else is on the panel until we rotate people out. So it'll be a fun time. Hoop God might not be able to make it. He said he's going to be late. So
Okay.
I'm not gonna fight to get him on the panel. So if he's unable to get there, then it's what it is.
The show must go on. Give the people what they want.
Exactly. So since Nick won this one, he will be facing Alessandro in the losers bracket finals, and whoever wins that gets to face Jim from Self Research, NBA Facts. Rex, you said, can I come or too many? I'll shoot you the link. So I'll shoot
Never
you the
too
link to
many.
come on in a minute after this. That way you can get a guaranteed spot. So anyway, but yeah, come join us then. Do you have anything else you'd like to say, Nick, before we shut this down?
Nope, that's it.
All right. So thanks again, Chad. I apologize. And Michael